Thank you, Manette, and thanks for having me today. I'm talking on behalf of Emma. She was our MSc student. She's now finished and moved on to better things, I hope. She can't be here today, so I'll be doing the talk. And today we're going to talk about the impact of the polyphagous short-tail borer, and some of you might know this, some might not. So we're going to just have a brief introduction to it. PSHB, or the short form for polyphagous short-tail borer, has been in the country for many, many years, but recently we started to realize it creeping up into our commercial orchards and all sorts of other urban environments, and it has been killing trees, for example, specifically what we can see from the urban environment, especially deciduous trees. And we know that this is a very complex invasion, and you can see sometimes we think a species comes in just as a species, but we now know they come in with a lot of hitchhikers. And in this case, they come in with a fusarium. Technically, this fusarium is their food, so they are called fungi farms or fungus farmers. Funguses are older than insects, so some people believe that the fungi is farming with the insect, and that still needs to be tested. But technically, these are a union, so they're complex. So they come into the country, you think just maybe a beetle, but essentially you're finding all sorts of other organisms coming in. The reality is this ambrosia beetle differs from the bark beetles in that they go into the wood. And the extent of this is that they basically damage all the vascular tissue inside, so the xylem and all these channels that's transporting water up and down the tree. And when you have a severe type of, I think this is a severe type of invasion, you can see those lesions, and that's the fungus growing. Remember, the fungus gets out and they start farming with it to provide food for the larvae. It's a very, very unique system, and it's an evolution of thousands of millions of years even old. And this is basically a problem when they come into a country. They come into a novel environment, and we don't really know how to sometimes deal with this huge complex. You can either treat the insect or the fungus. Technically, you need to treat both. But the real question we're answering, or wanted to answer, is what is the impact of this species and its fusarium onto the tree, or pear tree specifically? There was one big orchard in Somerset West that was invaded heavily. I got into the back end of that invasion, and we were invited to do this study. And really, the question is, there was a lot of, are these trees going to die? We know urban trees are dying. Not all of them, but some of them. What would be the impact and likely when they start invading? So we had this situation of a pear, in this case Packhams, in Somerset West that we investigated. Importantly to know, is that what we're talking about here is stress. What is the stress we're going to receive? If I kick you on your knee, you're going to upset at me, you're going to have a little bit of stress. But if I continuously cut you, continuously make you little bleeds, what is the impact of that? Do these trees recover? Because you do have natural resistance against fusarium within a tree, but what's the real impact of this? Okay, so then we basically had a couple of hypotheses. Really, the only ones I want you to think about is, one, if it's true that this fungi blocks your xylem, you will have to see some stress when it continuously blocks your xylem. We all have arteries inside of us. I'm continuously putting air bubbles in my arteries. At some point, my body will go into a decline, and you would start seeing dieback. And we wanted to see if we can, at the very least, as an early assessment, find evidence or traces of this stress. And then, very importantly, how would the fruit quality look like? And I'll come back to that. And secondly, we also looked a little bit at remote sensing, whether we can see at this initial phases of infestation, whether we can find with low-flying drones any significant indicator where there's problematic trees. So these were the main hypotheses that we looked at. So for this early assessment, we basically categorized the trees into different infestation levels. Just remember, A is the control, 0 infestation, so 0 beetles went into that tree, and then your highest ones, E and F, is where you see a lot, so multiple holes, and really looks like a shotgun that has been set onto this tree. And this, we think, could be then what is akin to death by 1,000 cuts. So you might not see something happening with one hole, but if I continuously cut you in small little pieces, you might bleed out. So that's what we hypothesized in this case. And then we had a couple of pairs that we picked from these trees, essentially 15 individuals per treatment, and then 20 leaves we also took off for time-integrated water use efficiency using carbon and nitrogen isotopes, just to kind of see if there's in the long term. Remember, they're deciduous plants, so that means that they have a full leaf cycle within a year, which means that we can actually look at the water use across the whole lifespan of this leaf in the season. Now, this complicated graph is actually, if there's arrows that are pointing in the opposite directions, there's a negative correlation. And when you look at this, you can, oh man, now can I go back? Okay, that one's short. A is on top. So to make this really easier to understand is really saying, for everything we've measured, the control trees had a completely different collectively set of variables versus what you see here at the bottom ends where EFF is. Right, so E and F, not EFF, E and F, is higher amounts of starch conversion. Also, the color was different. And so what this really means is, collectively, when they go into an orchard, even though we saw no signs of decline, no flagging of death, these trees were physiologically operating at a different level. And what was really interesting, and something we did not expect, was the starch conversion, essentially, and the coloring differences, which is very difficult to actually see in orchards. So the tree might not be dying, which is a positive, but there is actually an effect on quality. This wasn't done, of course, in depth, so quality can be many things, but in this case, what we measured were some key aspects, and there's definitely variation that's being introduced in these orchards when they are there. So in this early assessment, we know two things. One, there is evidence that when it's really dry in the orchard, these trees are a bit more stressed in the sense that they are now desperate for water and they use a bit more water. But that was the first evidence. And then really what we're finding is smaller, duller toned fruit, and they've got under the high attack, and they're also a bit more sweeter, just because there's more starch conversion going on in the background. This was what we found. And then we said, okay, that's the first assessment. Trees are looking healthy. What happens a year after? We can continue to look at that. And so we looked at agreement with a company called Chemic Airborne, who, for free, very kind of them, flew 4 or 5 flights for us over this orchard over a season, a couple of months. And we could find no indication using all the vegetation indexes we looked at, specifically like NDVI, but also a couple of other ones. We found no evidence that there is a perceivable stress from at least the fluorescence of these leaves. At least what we know is the chloroplast, the chlorophyll, the photosynthesis is happening. It looks very well wetted. Of course, it's irrigated. So this looks like a very healthy orchard. But it's not enough. We said we have to go ground truth this because we're looking for subtleties. Things degrade gradually and then suddenly. We don't want to get to that point, which is why we went back and we actually said, well, let's look at on the leaf level. So we've got a couple of instruments. One is called the fluorometer. It looks at the fluorescence of these leaves. I can tell you all the values we found were way above what we would start even perceiving to be light stress or photosynthetic breakdown. So for all practical purposes, these are very productive trees and they will continue. They look very healthy. They also, again, after 2 years, no dieback perceived. The only thing we picked up is a little bit of stomatal conductance differences, not in the whole, but if you take it day by day, there was a couple of days it's really hot. What you find then, and this really is what the literature also will tell you, is that the high attack categories, so we amalgamated some of the categories, so A and B is, or A is 0 and B is a little bit, and then the blue one is really high. We found that when it's getting to midday, under a day that there's a lot of stress, you do find that those trees are using more water. The implications of this is really, there's increased responsiveness to the tree to stress. Makes sense. They are in there, they are causing an effect. It's not a major one in terms of dieback, but they are causing an effect. So we need to understand that the activity that's there, although not in sense, killing everything off, there is unfortunately some physiological action that's going to happen, and we need to keep our hands on it. And I think, as a last slide, what we now understand, in this case, Packhams, it seems to be an opportunistic invasion. They are attracted to it. We know the Fusarium does not really grow very well in it, so there's not really a pathogenic side to it that we can pick up at the moment. But there's a lot of holes in these trees, and so we don't know what else can blow in there in time. So even though these trees are doing good, and perhaps the good news is that Packhams seems to be very resilient against this attack, we need to keep our eyes open in terms of further drought conditions, so managing your irrigation well, and especially things like climate change, which can increase drought in your soils, might have an adverse effect. But the main message is time is out. There is an impact on fruit quality. Thanks, Monette.
Thank you.